So if you've ever been here to my office, whether it was 6 months ago or last week, you'll notice there are three cardboard boxes over by the far wall. And that's just where they live. I started this job in the summer, a little bit before the high holidays. We were moving in our house. I was moving in my stuff here, and I slowly have unpacked. I did a bunch at the beginning, a little bit after the Hagim. And now those three boxes just sit there, waiting someday for me to unpack them, along with some other tasks in my life and objects that I walk by on a daily basis, and that's just now where they go, where they live. Business professor Leon Meganson once addressed a convention, and he actually quoted Charles Darwin, the founder of the idea of natural selection and evolution, the author of The Origin of Species. And what he said was that there's an interesting insight to the origin of species that you can take for business and other parts of our life. And what he said is that according to Darwin, it's not the most intellectual species that survives. It's not necessarily even the strongest species that survives. Right? We think of survival of the fittest, the biggest, the strongest. What he says is actually, it's the species that survives is the one that can best adapt and adjust to whatever environment it finds itself in. And the truth is, humanity is really good at adapting. We get used to something very quickly. In our house, in our bedroom, there are two different light fixtures. The bulb in one of them went out. And for the first week or so, it was on my to-do list. I have to get a ladder, I have to do this, I have to fix this. Now I walk by every day, and it's simply that light fixture doesn't turn on, that one does. It's just the world that I now live in. Sorry. To my wife's dismay. But we get used to things very quickly. I'm sure if you think about in your own life, there are things that when they first happened, you were ready to change them, you were ready to fix them. Or even if you moved not this year, but 5 years ago. There's probably a box somewhere in your house, or a cupboard or a drawer of things that you just put everything that you didn't have time to sort or to organize. And someday you're supposed to get to it. But now that's just the drawer where that stuff goes, or the cabinet or the cupboard, or the box, or the light switch. We adapt, we get used to something, and all of a sudden it becomes just the way things are, the world we live in. Now, it's a strength that humanity can adapt so well, but there's also a problem with it. And it's exactly that issue that I'm talking about now. In our parsha this week, in chapter 6, verse 7, God tells Moses, Ki ani Adonai Elohechem hamotzi etchem mitachat zivlot Mitzrayim. I am the God who will bring you out from the burdens of Egypt. And one of the rabbis, a Hasidic rabbi and Polish leader, Rabbi Simcha Bunim, he offers an interesting play on the word there. Zivlot, the burdens. And he says that you can read it as burdens, but without vowels, it actually could be savlanut, patience. You ever waited on hold in Israel? That's what they say. They say, thank you for your savlanut. Thank you for your patience. And what he said is God took them out of Egypt at that point. Not any later, because it was at that point their burdens became something they were patient with. They were used to them. If God had waited any longer, says Rabbi Bunim, any longer to take the Israelites out of Egypt, they would never have been able to. They would have become so adapted to their life of captivity that they never could have adjusted to a life of freedom. And it's that lesson that I want to think about. How we have this remarkable capacity to accept what is as what has to be. During COVID, we adapted in incredible ways. It's amazing when you think about it, during COVID, how well we were all able to adapt. It's not to say there weren't many people that suffered, that there weren't many people that were lonely, that mental health issues and a crisis in mental health really rose up from the loneliness and the separateness that we saw. But overall, we did, in general, a very great job. Schools went online, workplaces went online. All of a sudden, shopping, you couldn't go out. Everyone ordered everything online or delivery. Businesses switched very quickly to curbside pickup and other opportunities. Even our synagogues managed to move things online. But there's a problem with that. We got used to it. And in many ways, it's going back to the way things were. The world where we actually gather together in the workplace. We don't just stop by to grab a couple of files or paperwork or the few things that we can't do online, but actually sitting next to our colleagues and our coworkers and having conversations with them. It's shifting back to that world that's become difficult. The world of synagogue where we come and we sit, not just on Shabbat morning, which is wonderful. We have a very good crowd here today. You're the choir I'm preaching to. Is everyone at home? No. But coming back to shul, coming to programs, coming to events, coming to classes. It's a wonderful tool that we can reach people in their homes. That we can bring a b'nai mitzvah to people who can't come here and travel. That people who are homebound after years of being dedicated to this congregation and community, we can share with them the service, the music, the melodies, the Torah, a sense of community. But when we get used to that and we think that that's what synagogue is looking at that box on our screen, or that a class is watching a lecture on YouTube or on Zoom, rather than sitting in a room with a book, with other people, with a teacher, with fellow students, and learning together. That's where we have a problem. We get so used to the life that we have that it just becomes the only life that there is. One more lesson I wanted to share from our Parsha. It's probably one of the most famous verses in the Torah. When God hardens Pharaoh's heart. There is a lot that has been written about that. What does that mean, that Pharaoh's heart was hardened? But one of the teachings the rabbis have about this verse is actually not looking at this verse on its own. But they go through the Torah and they take all of the different places where the heart is mentioned and all of the different verbs that are ascribed to it. All the different things that a heart can do. A heart can become hardened. But a heart also fears. A heart can break. A heart can become proud. A heart can lust. A heart can hate. But a heart also feels joy. A heart comforts. A heart sings. It speaks. It hears. The heart even, in the Torah, can see. And what the rabbis with this midrash do is they take all of the different times the heart is mentioned and all of the actions that are attributed to it. And when you line them up, it's interesting to note the negative emotions, those actions that have negative connotation on one list and all the positive ones in the other, the negative ones are something that happens by oneself. And the rabbis tell us that Pharaoh's problem wasn't that his heart was hard, but it was his lack of connection to anybody but himself. And that was what made it hard. That's when our heart breaks. That's when our heart becomes prideful and becomes lustful and hateful. It's when it's by itself. But a heart sees another person, another heart. A heart speaks to another heart. A heart hears another heart. When we enter into a relationship with others, that's when our hearts are the most powerful and most positive. In the presence of somebody else, they do their best work. So my question to each of us this Shabbat, as a community and as individuals, is what are the things that we've gotten accustomed to? What are the things in our life we've adapted to in the past 2 years, 3 years? What are the things that now we simply believe are all that can be, rather than trying to change them and going back to what we once had and what's once? Because like the Israelites, when you live in captivity too long, those burdens become something you're patient with. They simply become life, the cage that we don't even see around us. I know families that used to gather every week for large Shabbat meals. And during COVID, obviously they couldn't. They did things virtually, they did things online. But now, it's holidays that they get together. It's become the routine. Those big family gatherings are no more for some people. Those big communal celebrations for some are no more. We had to protect ourselves by holding up in small groups to protect ourselves and the people we care about, the people we love. But at some point, we have to go back into the world. We can take the best of what we learned during COVID, and we can still use the internet, we can still use the virtual environment, we can use all of these different things to connect with each other. There's a lot of benefit that came from it. But we also can't get used to that as the only way. So this Shabbat, ask yourself those questions. What have you gotten used to? What have you just accepted? And what can you change for the better? We need to get back to being a community, to being physically present in each other's lives, not just on occasion, but on a more regular basis. Shabbat Shalom.